I'm doing well. I'm not nearly as busy as you are because just over the I feel like over the last couple days and weeks, it's just like project after project being announced. You have CENSUS on Comixology. You have the Black Panther Captain America game where you were at D23, and of course, just recently announced the Muhammad Ali graphic.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ,
Well,
Mark.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of things, but they've also been like deep in process and progress for years, sometimes decades. And so it's that weird thing where Zach Stentz is a buddy of mine, and one summer he had out both Thor and X-Men First Class within like a month of each other. He's like, yeah, but we wrote those movies like years ago.
I mean, the Ali project has been in development for. I feel like you said on Twitter, like your first email about it was like a decade ago or
It
something.
was a decade ago, yeah. Like I was still working for the Hollywood Reporter at the time, and I got a call from my literary agent who was like, "Hey, so First Second wants to talk to you about a thing." And I was like, "I don't know what this could be, but all right, sure." And I'm like, "Well, we're looking for somebody." She's like, "Do you like sports?" Depends on the sport. Um, and it was like, "Yeah, we're looking for a journalist, somebody who knows how to do research, knows how to do kind of like fact finding and keeping the appropriate notes and that sort of thing, and a graphic novelist, and somebody of color because we have this Ali project we want to do." And I was like, "I guess that's me because I think I do check all of those boxes." And then 10 years after that first conversation, we get to announce a book that's still not coming out for a year.
Right.
But the book's done, it's written, it's drawn. Like I've seen covers, all of it's like now it's like in big boy book production world, which seems to take much longer than comics.
Right. Yeah. First Second, even though they do graphic novels, I think Gene Yang says this all the time. It's like because he's First Second poster boy, but like doing a First Second book is very, very different if you're used to the grind of comic books, and then vice versa, because he went from the First Second world to pumping out Superman comics and was like, whoa, you need this stuff every week.
Hold on, like I'm used to months, not weeks. Years, not months.
Oh, and I'm glad you mentioned, you used to be with the Hollywood Reporter. We met when you were at Entertainment Weekly, and of course you've moved on from journalism to doing everything else. But how has that journalism background helped you as a TV writer, as a comic writer, as a podcaster, as a sometime actor in Kevin Smith movies? Like how has that background in journalism helped?
I mean, journalism teaches you two things, chiefly. One is speed, especially if you're working for a weekly or a daily or an hourly, website to newspaper to weekly magazine. So you got to work fast. You got to write fast. Like the time can't be spent to continue to like dither, and I got to make sure that it's a perfect turn of phrase. And they're like, no, man, we got to get it done. Like something's got to be on these pages. And so it teaches you sort of the discipline of speed. And also it teaches you how to emotionally disconnect. Because, as any writer will tell you, whatever they're working on, it is their entire world while they're working on it. And it's like, I got to like, this is it. Like, it's the thing I've wanted to say. It's everything to me. And I just want to hold it and cradle it like a baby and like, well, pat it and burp it. But it's like, no, it's got to go. Like you have to let go of it. It's going to go up to your editor, it's going to go onto the page, and then it's going to go onto the world. And so, when you're writing something as in depth as a TV episode or a feature film or whatever it is, it's your whole world for the time you're working on it. But then you just have to let it go. And then the things that will happen to it once it leaves the house are not your responsibility, and it's nothing you can control. And keeping both of those things in mind has been a godsend of just both from a work-life balance sort of way and just emotional health of like, you have to let it go. You can't, it's not your baby anymore.
Yeah.
As I drop a kid off at college.
Well, congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
That's a first for you, right? The first kid to go to college.
That's the first. And like, just learning that lesson of like, he used to be like 10 feet away, and I sort of knew where he was every night and could talk to him every day, or when he got to high school every other day. But now it's I get weekly updates. What's going on? Like,
yeah, right, and that's just gonna just drop in frequency as they get older, right?
Like, totally. Like as he goes and builds a life and moves to a city and gets a job, and it's like, well, maybe I'll hear from him on Sundays. Maybe I'll hear from him every couple of Sundays.
Right. Well, you do get to tickle the journalist itch every once in a while, since you do also co-host a podcast where news is a big part of Fat Man Beyond podcast, and it's kind of grown beyond. I remember it started out as a Batman podcast, and you
Yep.
were just like an occasional guest. How did you become like when Kevin's off doing tour spots for Clerks 3? It's your show. It becomes Black Man Beyond, and it becomes your show. Like, how did you get roped into the podcasting world? Because I don't know that that was always a goal the way maybe making a movie by the time you turned 50 was.
No, I had zero ambitions of podcasting whatsoever.
And now you're reading
Like,
Manscaped ads every other week.
let's talk about your balls, boys and girls. It was the most delightful, felicitous accident where, I remember interviewing Kev once or twice for Entertainment Weekly, and then we got to be friendly, and then, I'd come out to LA from New York, where I was still living at the time. It's like, hey man, you should stop by the house. I just finished a movie. You want to come see it? It's like, sure, I'll come see it. It's like, hey man, I do a podcast with my wife. Do you want to be a guest in the morning? And so I just rolled over to his house at 8 a.m. to do an episode of Plus One with Jen and Kev. And he's like, oh, that was fun. Like, this Batman podcast. Do you like Batman? I'm like, yeah, I like Batman. It's like, all right, well, think of your top 10 Batman stories, and you come on and be a guest. And then that just became sort of a conversation. I think the Dark Knight Returns had just dropped, and he's like, oh, we should talk about that. It's like, oh man, let's do a commentary track for that. That was fun. And like, I've still never talked to him about my top 10 Batman stories. It's still like on some notebook somewhere. But then it was like, yeah, let's just do these commentary tracks. And we made it through all of the Batman movies up until Batman Begins. And then it was like, hey, that's cool. Let's just do Gotham. And then Gotham was not a thing that either of us loved enough to talk about every week for 200 episodes. And he's like, oh, how about we just do the podcast together, and we'll do this little news segment in the middle of it, like what's happening in pop culture today. And then that just sort of became the podcast. And then at some point it's like, hey man, do you want to be the co-host of this? I was like, what do I have to do? What do you need from me?
Do I need an outline every fucking show, or do I need?
Yeah, like, am I booking
research?
Guests? Am I like, no, man, just
drive out the scum and villainy on a Tuesday night or whatever.
We'll just do it like this until one of us gets bored of it. And so far that hasn't happened, thankfully, because it is fun and it's just a joy. And he's a lovely guy to be around. That's a good spirit to have in your life and to be able to absorb the energy of. But I guess it was when he did Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. It was the first time he took a movie on tour. It was like, yeah, man, I'm going to be gone for like 4 months. And it's like, well, I suppose like there's still going to be news while you're gone for 4 months. I suppose like I could just keep the feed alive. That's all it was to do. Like the Black Man Beyond stuff was just like, it's shitty when you're a fan of a podcast that just goes dark for months on end. I was like, I'll just put something in there. And then it just became like, all right, I guess I'll just call some friends and see if they're around and if they want to hop on the podcast with me. And we'll do some of them. I mean, at the first time we did them all live because, that was how the podcast was done. So let's go to Scum and Villainy. Let's hang out. Let's record a couple podcasts. And then, pandemic hit. And then it became like, well, all right, I can do this on Zoom and we can do this on Zoom. And that's totally cool. And so now we're on the second Kev's on tour and I've got a podcast. which is weird and random, and to your point, not a thing that I was courting in any way.
Well, and I think some people forget, like Kevin was podcasting before podcasting was a thing, right? Like the podcasting network existed, I feel like 15 years ago, right? Like it was him and Marc Maron were the only people.
It was like him and Marc Maron and like Adam Carolla, I think, had a podcast or something.
Right.
And kind of nobody else. And so yeah, he's like first in the door in the game, and it's been like 15 years that he's been doing it. And I think we've been doing Fat Man for maybe 10 years.
Has it been 10 years?
It feels like it, I think.
Or are you just saying spending time with Kevin feels like a long time?
It's the weed time dilation effect.
The space-time continuum does extend when you're around that much pot. Well, I was, I think going back to like, you did the Battlestar Galactica podcast. Did that predate your experience with Fat Man?
No.
Was Fat Man the inspiration for?
Fat Man was my way in. And it was like, and the only reason that podcast even happened was because I had a little bit of podcast experience. Like when I first talked to Trisha help her about doing it. She's like, I don't know anything about doing a podcast. It's like, all I know is Battlestar. And I says, well, I do this other podcast. And so I know a little bit. I don't know a lot. I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to produce. I don't know how to,
But I can talk.
yeah, like I don't know how to feed it out into the world, but I can help build a structure of what that podcast looks like. And I can at least connect us with people who do podcasts. And she's like, well, that's better than I got. So let's go and make a podcast.
Well, and that became a genre unto itself. The where the cast looks back at. I know there was like the West Wing Weekly, and now you have like the It's Always Sunny podcast. It's like that's become its own genre of
It totally. And like we did rip it off wholesale from West Wing Weekly. And to the point where I reached out to Rishikesh Hirway, and I was like, hey man, do you have some tips, some advice for doing like what do you need? Did you need legal approval from Warner Brothers to do clips of the show? Like he was just the
yeah,
font of information. And I always credit them. It's like, yeah, it's 100% a person who was on the show and a person who loved the show.
right.
And that's the dynamic, and that's what makes it work. And then every episode we'll talk about an episode of the show itself, but then maybe we will, and it'll just wildly digress. And it was great, and it was wonderful. And yes, now it is its own genre. It is its own like TV recap thing that we never get any credit for being at the front.
Yeah,
That
you were at
vanguard.
the apex there. Now that you the podcasting thing is out of the way, you have all of these graphic novel projects you're working on. I wanted you to spend a little bit talking about Adora, though. I know that, I mean, you're on this Rinky Dink podcast. You were on fucking Seth Meyers talking about it, so thank you for slumming it with me. But it's such a great book. And was this your first Eisner nomination?
It was. Yeah.
What was that
I mean,
experience like?
it was a little bizarre in that I've been an Eisner judge before.
Mhm.
I've attended the Eisners. I've read any number of Eisner nominated books. But being nominated for a thing is always a weird feeling of like, I guess they liked it kind of, and I guess that's cool. And I am gonna harbor no misconceptions that we have a chance in winning. And Kev is always like the most rosy. It's like, oh man, you're totally gonna win. You're gonna win. What are you even? Why are you being a chump about it? You're 100% gonna win this. I'm like, I never believe that we are. I never believe that anything is
Kevin's such a fan. He went out and burned a bunch of anti-Pope graphic novels after the ceremony because he was so mad. Shout out to
It's like,
Shane
what?
Floor.
Yeah, for sure. I was like, I don't know what our competition is, but I have to believe that somebody else is going to win this, which is exactly what happened. But to the point where I had no speech planned because I just didn't like. I always believe that I believe that the bad news is what's going to happen, so that I allow myself to be surprised by the good news, as opposed to hoping for the good news and being disappointed when it doesn't happen. Like that is just
Always going with low expectations, I think.
go in with like, yeah, absolutely. Be surprised. Find a way to be surprised. But the experience was kind of lovely, in that people read the work and they liked the work. And that is all at the end of the day you want as a person who writes stuff and makes stuff is, did it find that audience and did that audience appreciate it? And, for every nomination for an award, is great, but I would happily trade the experiences of listening to kids and adults and parents come up to me and say that I love this book. Like this book gave me a window into somebody that I love's life that I didn't have before, and this book touched me and all that. And like that is worth pounds more than a nomination or even a win for that
Right,
matter.
or even the trophy itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now you're working with your longtime collaborator, Adam Freeman, on yet another comic. This is a Comixology exclusive. That means there is no hard copy floppy of this book. Maybe eventually a trade. Is that how that works? Tell me how the digital comics space works.
At least with Comixology, it is digital first and then print to follow. So we'll be monthly. I think it's like the 11th or 12th of every month. A new issue of CENSUS will drop, 5 issues total. And then when we're done with that, I'm pretty sure it's like next spring, there's going to be a trade collection of the book. And it's a thing that Adam and I had sort of come up with and been playing with for years. Just this idea, both of us grew up in New York. Both of us had our first like big boy jobs in Manhattan. And just that feeling of stumbling through some street in New York, past a bunch of doors, some of which looked like restaurants or whatever, some of which were kind of foreboding, but just there's more doors than people, and what's behind all of these doors. And if it was somebody's job to just knock on those doors and ask the very simple census questions: who lives here, what's their place of origin, and then just move on. But to have each one of those interactions have the capacity for adventure or humor or horror or fright or action or whatever, felt like, oh no, this is we could do this forever. Like, this could be 100 issue long book. Like, all we need, that's a lot of work, but still, it just felt like an idea that we could generate lots of content off of. And it's been fun. It's been fun, and it's fun to get to be a little funny. I don't often write humor because I end up, the science fiction action guy,
Mhm.
or in the case of Adora, like, it's full on a quest narrative that doesn't really ask for much humor in it. But to write, like, not to say it's a sitcom, but there's jokes. There's jokes and senses, both visual jokes and just like textual jokes. And it's been a riot. And the Comixology folks are super easy to work with. They're like, we like the idea. Go make a comic book. So great. Here's the artist we want to hire. Will he work for the rate? Yes. Excellent. Let's move on. Like,
I was going to ask, like, I mean, you've done, traditional comics work in the past. We were joking earlier about like the difference between the book market and the comics market. But how has does doing comics for digital, is it a different process? Because I feel like Census was just announced and it was like, oh, and it's out like tomorrow, right? Like, we're usually like there's a longer lead time because you have to go to printing and then it's got to go through Diamond and all that nonsense. But like with digital, I've kind of like secretly said this even when I worked at Diamond. Like, people were just like would rather read the books on their phone than go to the comic shop every week. And then if they really like the books, get a trade later, kind of like what became the Comixology model. But like, do you see, like, is it, as a creator doing digital only comics, having like less barriers to like get it to the reader? You kind of just do the digital file and boom, it's there.
yeah, I mean, there's something, the weird part about making print comics, especially print floppies, is that you're asking two different audiences to buy the book. You're asking the stores to order the book months before the book comes out. So you're doing a whole press wave and a whole PR push just to get retailers on board.
Yeah.
And then you're doing a second one to get readers to show up to the retailers to then buy the book the way it is. And there's some things you can change, some things you can't. But with the Comixology model is, yeah, we can announce the book on a Friday and it can drop on a Tuesday, and we're only having to sell it once. And we're selling it to the consumer. Um, and there's something kind of streamlined about that and awesome about that. And being able to work up that level of enthusiasm from an audience once is more sustainable than having to do it over time. And yeah, the process has been really smooth. Like, I love print comics. I love working in comics. Comics is like where I go to play. Um, so I don't think that it's ever going to be a thing that I kick to the curb in favor of, TV or movies or video games for that matter. But it's relatively low impact in terms of, yeah, you get to write a thing and an artist will draw a thing, and then we can just press a button and an audience can read a thing. And that's
Yeah.
kind of cool.
Well, I wanted to ask you about being a video game writer, and I know that I probably can't ask specific questions because I think Disney snipers are right there peeking down through the window. But I will ask maybe a more process question. Again, going about how to be a writer. You've done TV, you've done comic books, you've done film and short film. I do want to talk about Splinter. How is writing video games? Because I feel like I'll straight up, I'm not a gamer. Like, I'm just I have no, like, I can't figure it out. I can't figure games out. Like, I get frustrated and then I just stop playing. I don't understand how people spend like 20 hours, solving puzzles and shit. So I'll just say that, and I've lost all of our listeners and viewers saying. But the other thing I know about games, having played my share, is that there are all of these options that can go very different directions. And so, like, just coming from a creative perspective, like as a writer, is it like choose your own adventure? Are you having to write like 12 different narratives in order to tell the one story you want to tell? And if there are any secrets about the game you want to reveal, please.
Right.
No one's listening to this podcast.
Nobody's. I mean, the thing about there are so many different kinds of games. The kind of game that this is, at the present, untitled, Black Panther, Captain America, World War II adventure game. It is very much like Uncharted, which is the game that Amy Hennig, who is the creative director of this game, is best known for. And those games, and it's a narrative game, it's a first person game, it's a single player game. They offer the illusion of choice, but not choice itself, because there's a story that needs to be told. And so it's on rails. Like, it is going to tell the story and it's going to carry you along with it as it goes. Now, you can fail at a particular point in the game and not get further into the story, but it's not an open world game. It's
Right.
not Skyrim. It's not Grand Theft Auto. It's not,
Which is a
"Oh, I'm
different
just gonna,"
skill of game writing, I guess.
totally, which is, here's a bunch of things in the world that you could do. If you stumble upon them, great. If you don't, they're there and we don't care. So the process of writing this particular game was very much like Uncharted, which is, there's a story we're going to tell. That story will take us anywhere between 8 to 10 hours to tell. And so we'll probably slice it into chunks and we'll treat it a bit as if it's of a TV show. Except, the thing that I learned was, games have a failure state in a way that watching a thing doesn't, in that there has to be an opportunity for you to succeed or fail. Otherwise, why are you gaming at all? The most rudimentary version of it is like, it's a puzzle you got to solve, and if you don't solve, you can't keep playing. And so just figuring out how to leave room for the game mechanics to take over, to make it a vicarious experience, to make it I'm actually punching Nazis in the face as Black Panther, because you want to do that because that just sounds fun.
It sells itself.
Yeah, and or Steve Rogers, great. Let me just throw a shield into a bunch of Nazi faces. That's also great. But it's figuring out how to tell a story that is captivating and transporting and involving, not just for you playing, but for the person who can't play games or doesn't want to play games as a spectator. Because, like, I know that my mom, who loved the Black Panther movie but saw none of the rest of the MCU because she just didn't give a shit, she would love there to be a World War II set in Paris Black Panther game with Captain America in it and Gabriel Jones and Denali, and, like, let's just tell this big ass story. She's never going to pick up a controller to do it.
Right.
But if I could deliver her a Black Panther story that she might be involved in, she could stand over my shoulder and watch. That was the whole point of at least my involvement in the game, was to make it so that, and a bunch of other people, a bunch of other writers with us, like, how can we make this as transporting and involving as a great episode of TV that you can also play?
I've been guilty of going to YouTube and watching, like, all of the cinematics of Star Wars Battlefront into, like,
Right.
a 2-hour movie. So I totally feel what your mom is saying, because
Totally.
again,
Like, I
as a
never
non-gamer, it's like, but I want to know what happens in this, so let me just watch this 2-hour YouTube video.
Right. Like, this seems cool. Never going to play it, but I'd like to know about it.
Because I'm stupid. I can't figure out the puzzles. I alluded earlier, the other thing that you've been working on, and I think you're still deep into, is this short film project that you kickstarted successfully last year. You had this goal to make a movie by the time you turned 50, and I think you were just under the wire. At least you started production.
We missed it by a week.
Close.
My birthday was November 29th. We started shooting on December 5th. And it was literally one of those, like, should we damn the torpedoes just to try to make a date, or could we actually use this week?
I don't know. That it works for Warner Brothers, I guess.
Yeah, just go. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
We'll just cancel it later. Anyway,
nobody's gonna miss it.
But yeah, so tell us about Splinter. Like, what was the idea behind it? When can people expect us to see the finished product?
The idea, it came from a conversation, as many things in my life do, with Kevin, in that he had been approached to do an episode of the Jordan Peele produced Twilight Zone, and he's like, "Do you want to do a Twilight Zone?" I said, "Yeah, I want to do a Twilight Zone. It's Twilight Zone. It's great." And they had an idea that they thought would be good for Kev, but they also said, "But if there's anything else you want to do, pitch it and we'll think about it." And so we started talking about it, and then on the flight home, we were both in Vancouver at the time. On the flight home, I started thinking about the things that are always in episodes of the Twilight Zone, and the two of which seemed to kind of mate together nicely are, there's always an episode on a plane, and there's always an episode with a kid who's got freaky powers. Apparently the two things that Rod Serling was most afraid of with flying and children. And so then I just had this idea to kind of put the both of those together that had a little bit of a twist at the end of it, but had, it was very, nightmare at 20,000 feet of like, here's a thing that you think is mundane and normal and terrestrial that then becomes supernatural as it goes and then explodes into like action and a little bit of horror, before you get the question that it asks at the end of it. And this was specifically wrestling with ideas of faith, and is belief necessary for, prosperity, for safety, for salvation. And so I wrote up this thing, sent it to Kev. He loved it. Sent it to Twilight Zone. They dug it, but like, we already have a plane episode this month, this season, maybe season 3. That never
Which
happened.
never came, right?
Which never came. And so I was just sitting on this idea that I liked, and I'm like, oh well, the Twilight Zone was always meant to be, done in one. And what if we do this? And like a moron, I aimed way bigger than your average short film, which means like now I need planes. I need a plane that I can shoot on, and I need a child actor, neither of which I had in my hip pocket. And one of them made it an incredibly expensive short. And so, the minute I brought on a producer who starts like breaking down the script and doing research as to where we can shoot, it's like, oh yeah, you're going to need to crowdfund this. You're going to need to raise money for this, because I was willing to spend X, and this is going to cost lots of Y's, and so you're going to need some help. And so like we raised the money, like I said, last December we shot it. We've been in post ever since, and it's been a mixture of paying people who are experts for their time and their effort and their talent, and counting on favors from friends who can deliver, amazing work for far less than they should be getting. And so like literally my email box now are the closing credits that I just need to approve, and then we're done. Like our deadline at this point is September 26th, because that is the last time we could submit to Sundance.
Oh, okay.
And so that's always been the festival circuit was always the final resting place for this. And so that's our deadline, and knock on wood, I think we're going to beat it. And then that's where we are. And as soon as it starts submitting to festivals, as soon as we're done, means I can start sending it to the Kickstarter backers. I can start sending out links so people can watch it. Because, that's what, at this rate, some 2,400 people drop money in the bucket for.
That
was to get
that
it
must have been an
looked at.
amazing experience, like just feeling to have like, those folks show up. It's kind of like what you're saying when you have to sell the comic to not only the retailer, but you just go straight to consumer. It's kind of the same thing here.
It was so surreal, because I was 100% convinced that it wouldn't happen, and as always, apparently a recurring theme in my stories is, and so Kevin told me, Kevin said, you gotta believe, man. Like
Well,
I know that
actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about. One, before I get to that question, I did want to ask if, now that you've, all this work to go into this short, did you get the bug to maybe, now I want to do a feature? Or is it like, oh, I did my movie, I'm done, this is too much?
it's I people have been asking me that the entire way through the process. And while making the short, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this again. This is a lot. And then, but like the minute we wrapped the short, I was like, I
Right.
think I have an idea for another short.
It's like when you have the baby and you like the mother forgets of all the pain that went through.
Yeah.
And it's
Like
like, yeah,
nobody
let's have
has,
another one.
yeah, nobody would have more than one kid if you couldn't forget the pain of the first one. And so yeah, like I think there's probably a feature version of Splinter, and so once it's done, we'll see if there's any traction there. Once we make it, start dipping our toes into the festival scene, and once other people get to see it, and we can actually talk about it for real. Maybe I don't know. Like
You're too
getting
deep in
to
it right now.
a little too deep into it, but there is something incredibly fun and rewarding about getting a bunch of friends together and playing pretend.
Well, so that leads me to the fact that your podcasting partner in crime, Kevin Smith, is probably the most famous DIY filmmaker, right? Like Clerks was made on like a shoestring at night when he was, off the clock. And that was of course 30 years ago. And I wonder, like, just comparing that experience of like what it's like now to be able to, like, if Kevin Smith was in his 20s today and wanted to make Clerks, do you think it would have been easier? And in what ways would it have been harder? now that you've gone through the experience of like making a movie in the 2020s?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin always says like, man, we had 23 grand for Clerks and you had 4 times that and you're making a short. Like I made a whole ass movie for a fourth of the money. I think it's funny because I think at the time when Kev made Clerks, if you were an aspiring filmmaker, you had to make a film,
Mhm.
right? Like that was the sole mode of expression you had. Like not many people were making shorts because there wasn't even that much of a festival circuit at the time. Like it was just beginning. Sundance was just kind of brandy new at that point. But like it wasn't as if there was a YouTube or a
Right.
TikTok or an Instagram to be an outlet for your thoughts and your ideas or whatever. Would a Kevin Smith today make a movie? Maybe not.
Mm.
Like maybe he just have a fucking kick-ass TikTok channel or a kick-ass Instagram feed or a kick-ass YouTube
Right.
space.
Which is actually like so many of the, like the Shang-Chi action coordinators were
Yeah,
like the Marshall Club, like, and they did everything everywhere all at once. Like they came straight from YouTube to these like mega franchise films. So you're right. It is, YouTube is kind of like where folks go when they want to make films nowadays.
yeah, because everybody's got a movie studio in their pocket,
Mhm.
and so everybody, like if you've got some talented friends who can do a thing with their bodies and their faces and their minds, and you've now got a capture medium and a distribution venue, then like what's to stop you? Unlike in 1991, like, yeah,
Right.
you needed to get together film and a camera and a crew, and we needed to shoot it, and then we had to hope somebody would buy it in order for anybody to see it. But now all of those barriers don't exist anymore. And so I have to think that the person who wants to be, quote unquote, a voice of a generation doesn't necessarily need movies to be that person.
And do you think so? The flip of that question is like, what would be harder now is that because everyone has the studio in their pocket, you have exponentially more competition.
Uh-huh.
Whereas like in the 90s, it was like Kevin, it was Richard Linklater, it was
Yeah,
Quentin, right? There was like 6 of them in
yeah, Rodriguez
1993.
and
And right,
yeah, and
exactly. But
Spike
now it's
Lee.
like there's literally 80 million people who have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I mean it's easier than it's ever been, and when it gets easier, the pressure on the people who want to do it is harder because suddenly now you have to have the thing to say that will cut through, or you will have to have the point of view or the weird innovation and technique to be
Mhm.
able to slice through that nobody else is doing. I mean, it's the Robert Rodriguez of it, right? Like
Right.
only thing I can afford is to edit. And so I'm going to make these movies with so many cuts that it feels like it's bigger than it is. Like that's my jam. That's my thing that I'm doing that nobody else is doing.
Right.
And I've barely scratched the surface of TikTok because it frightens me.
Yeah,
Um,
it's the
uh,
same, bro. Like that
yeah,
might as well
like
be a foreign
yeah,
language because
as did Snapchat before it. But just looking at when you see like the best versions of TikTok and just some of this filmmaking, some of these transitions, some of these just all we have here is a camera and all we're doing is inventing a new language of cinema. Like it's amazing to watch. It's sometimes headache inducing, and that's fine because it should be, as I'm an old man.
yeah.
It should not be for
Yeah.
me. But
I think
I
the greatest sin TikTok will unleash on future film goers is just the how it fucks up the aspect ratio where everything is now vertical.
yeah, I know. I know. It's like, why is this movie funny? Like, well, I shot it landscape, not portrait, like a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Well, before we wrap, Mark, anything else you want to announce? Since like I said, you just got project after project. I know, like you were on Fat Man recently. You were being cagey about a project you and Kevin were working on.
Yeah, it's a thing that I had been working on for about 6 months and then, brought it to him at Comic-Con. Like we literally after one of our podcasts at Comic-Con. I was like, I kind of thing I want to talk to you about. And I pitched it to him. He's like, yeah, let's go do that. Which, yes, absolutely can't talk about it yet. And it's still like
Again,
early
no one's
days.
listening, Mark. It's fine.
It's nothing to see here. Moving on. But yeah, I mean the process, the mire of Hollywood is such that you've got to have like 6 or 7 or 8 different things kind of always happening at once. Some of which are way more active than others. Some of which are like, oh no, this is the thing I'm working on today and for the next month. But there's always like a plate that's in the back kind of spinning just in case like it decides it wants to move up, just in case the trends of the world seem to favor it, just in case there's a person who you think can be amazing as a collaborator who has some availability. Like, so that back in the 5 years ago, like Census was one of those plates. The Ali thing was one of those plates. The video game, was maybe barely on the horizon, but I had met Todd Stashwick, who was my way into the video game. Like, and then there's the things that fell apart that nobody will ever get to see.
Right.
Because that's also like the hit rate is always low. It's like baseball, right? Like you could be a slugger and hit 1 out of every 3 pitches.
Right. That's 30% is good in baseball.
30% is great.
It's kind of what's kind of crazy. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. And so, if you're going to be like, sure, there's the Vince Gilligans who are like 3 for 3, but then there's everybody else like, all I want to do, man, is get on base.
Yeah.
Like if I can get on base with some semblance of regularity, then I'm great. I'm golden.
Yeah. You're not only a creator, but you're a fan too, right? And like the line between fan and creator has blurred tremendously over the last 10 or 15 years. And, like when you were doing Masters season 1, parts 1 and 2, well, actually season 1, part 1, because that's when all the like people lost their shit, right?
Yeah.
And fans were very vocal about it. I mean, Kevin was visibly upset, I think, by a lot of like the fan reaction. But you see this, it's not just Masters of the Universe fans, right? Like the Snyder Cut, like everything that fans feel entitled to, they have a voice now because of the internet. Like what we were saying, the internet, YouTube makes you more vocal than before. Like just what is your take on, fandom and like that line between fandom and creator, and like allowing fans maybe more say than they should? I don't know, maybe it's a good thing. Where do you fall on that debate?
I mean, I think I fall in I've been a fan of things that I've both loved and been disappointed in. But I understand that fandom is a passive experience, in that I come to it as a receptor and not an influencer in what's happening. And I've also heard from lots of people who make things that listening to fan reaction is ultimately like you want to hear what people think, you want to hear how they respond to stuff, but they can't quite be part of the process. And the reason is because so many of the things that we love in the content that we absorb and intake, we would not be privy to making. Like nobody who loved Game of Thrones would have requested a red wedding. They just wouldn't have. They wouldn't have requested the death of Ned Stark. They wouldn't have requested, all of those moments that surprise us and shock us and twist us and delight us, because we don't know what we want yet. We only know what we like. And sometimes we don't know what we need. And there's no way to be party to that as a fan. You can't know what you need as a fan. You're just going to ask for what you want. You can be tickled and pleased by stuff. Like I never in a million years thought that what happened in Endgame is what was going to happen in Endgame. And yet it meant the world to me when it happened, and it all kind of clicked, because even though I'm a fan, I don't have the same perspective as Marcus and McFeely and the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige. And they sort of know for themselves holistically what the story needs to make it the best version of itself. And a fan can't know that. And a fan shouldn't know that, because then they're not a fan. Then they don't get to sit there on opening night and lose their fucking minds.
Yeah.
Because they know too much, and they shouldn't. And so I still believe that even as a fan of stuff, that there's stuff that I love that I have no desire to make. There's stuff that I make that, that I still love dearly, that I get to be a part of, having any sense of what it's going to be in the world. But the entitlement of here's what I want, go make it, isn't the way it works.
Everyone's become Kathy Bates in Misery almost, right?
Right. It's like, yeah, sure. Would I love George R. R. Martin to finish that book? Yeah. Does he owe me that book?
Right.
No. Do I have any claim on his time and his pace in which he wants to write that book? No. I'm a fan of it. I'll happily take it when I get it. I may never get it. And that just gets to be another story we get to tell as fans. But we don't own it at all. As much as I wish George Lucas would have stopped monkeying with Star Wars, it's like, I get it. I mean, it's his. Like, his name is on it. If there's a thing anybody learns in elementary school, is if you put your name on a thing, it's yours. And so his name is on it. He can do whatever he wants to with it. I am then reserved the right not to like it.
Right.
But you know, the idea that fans should be listened to in terms of dictating future story feels like not just misguided, but not actually what fans want.
Right.
Because what we want is to be surprised by a thing that we love.
And then it's hard to say, like, what do the fans want, because no one fan represents all the fans. So for every fan you're Rise of Skywalker, I think, is a perfect example. For every fan you're trying to satiate, there are like 1,000 others that you've pissed off, and vice versa, right? So
Yeah, and fans will come to things when they come to them. Like I was not a fan of the Star Wars prequels. There's a generation for whom that's their Star Wars,
right,
and they love it. And for a while I was shitty about that because I think they're awful. But who am I to say what makes a person happy?
yeah,
Who am I to say what dictates how they define themselves by, the media they intake? And so, like, yeah, like if you love those movies, love them to death. If they're what Star Wars is to you, power to you, man. Like, if you can find a way to love something in this godforsaken world, why do I have to be shitty about it?
Yeah, and I wonder if that's just something, because to your point, I think all of us, particularly those of us who are of a certain age, matured in our fandom and went from like shitting on things to accepting things, to be like, love what you love, man. Because I think that's where I am.
Yeah, and also I think that we're in similar enough age brackets to remember when we were just grateful to get it.
Yeah,
Because it was 3 years between Star Wars stories until it was 15 years between Star Wars stories. And then we got one. Oh my God, this is amazing. And now we live in a world where we're getting everything we want every week.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming.
It's over. Like, I don't have enough time to watch all the things that are made for me.
Yeah,
totally. And so it's easy to be somewhat more blasé and dictatorial about it. I was like, well, you couldn't have made that better. You couldn't have been wise. I was like, I just remember being thankful that we got a crappy movie out of anything, absolutely, let alone, the height of television and cinema is being made of stuff that we loved as kids.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. Mark, thank you so much, as always, for joining us here at the Nerds Club. You are a true friend of the pod. For folks who may not be familiar with your work, how can they find you on the internet?
I'm relatively easy to find. I am at Marc Bernardin. That's Mark with a C, Bernardin with 2 R's. On both Twitter and Instagram.
Not where you think. Just kidding. Sorry.
Just all at the end. I don't truck with Facebook that much anymore, because it is a hell space of diminishing returns. But yeah, man, I mean, CENSUS now out once a month, every month until I think it's September, so probably January, if I can count right. And then hopefully I'll have some more information about other stuff sooner rather than later.
Good luck on Splinter. Good luck on the podcast. Good luck on all the things that you're doing. And again, thank you for stopping by this Rinky Dink podcast.
Appreciate it, Keith. Always
glad
a pleasure
to have you.
All right, man.
Thanks, Mark.
In the lectures, fanboys, professional artists, and professors. Maybe a nerd who's just like you, talking about the things that you like too. So I invite you to the NOC. In full color, you see me. The Hard Knock Life. Comics